They scheduled his death. He was just hours away from being forgotten, another broken creature left behind by a system that had no room for failure. But then, a phone call changed everything. What happens when a dying bobcat, a retired couple, and one last act of compassion collide? This is the true story of Rowan, a wild heart who refused to fade, and the family who chose him when no one else would. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy the story, please like and follow. It helps us keep creating more. Your feedback means everything. Thank you. At exactly 2:00 p.m. on Friday, case 7159 was scheduled to die. But fate had one more move to play. The fluorescent lights flickered above as Dr. Claire Hensley walked the concrete corridors of the Montana State Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. She had done this routine 1,000 times before, but today felt heavier. The air was thick with silence and inevitability. She paused at the final enclosure. Inside, curled tightly in the far corner, was case 7159, a juvenile bobcat male roughly 10 months old. His name, if anyone cared to give him one, was Rowan. Rowan didn't lift his head when Claire approached. His ribs jutted sharply through his dull coat, and the once wild fire in his amber eyes had long since faded. He was a ghost in a cage. Claire checked her clipboard. Scheduled euthanasia. Friday 2:00 p.m., just 2 days away. He had arrived 4 months ago after a hiker found him collapsed near a hiking trail, emaciated, dehydrated, and showing signs of prolonged captivity, likely an illegal pet turned loose when he became too wild. No microchip, no ID, no history, just a breathing mystery with no fight left in him. They'd tried specialized diets, enrichment toys, simulated prey. Nothing worked. Rowan refused to chase, wouldn't eat unless alone, and showed zero survival instincts. He barely acknowledged people or animals, just waited always in the corner, always silent. The facility didn't have the capacity to house unreleasable animals permanently. And Rowan wasn't eligible for an education program. The system didn't allow for exceptions. Claire lingered at his enclosure longer than usual. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "We did what we could." Her phone buzzed. She almost ignored it. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in years. Sophie Bell, Hollow Pines Refuge. Claire, the voice came through gently. "I heard you've got a bobcat on the list. Juvenile. Human imprinted." Claire's breath caught. "Yes, but he's bad off, Sophie. No progress in 4 months. Doesn't hunt. Doesn't engage." "I don't think send me his file," Sophie cut in. "We might have an option." Claire hesitated. "The transport? We'll arrange everything. If we're going to try, it has to be now." That night, Claire sat alone in the office staring at Rowan's file. She clicked send. 3 days later, the van arrived. The driver handed her a form already signed. Hollow Pines was officially taking custody. Claire watched as Rowan was loaded into the transport crate. He didn't resist, didn't growl or struggle, just let himself be lifted and locked inside. "You sure about this?" she asked the woman accompanying the driver. The woman, mid-50s with wind-burned cheeks and warm eyes, nodded. "We've got a foster team in British Columbia. They specialize in hard cases." Claire looked through the crate's bars one last time. Rowan's eyes met hers briefly, empty, yet still watching. "I hope you find what you need," she whispered. As the van pulled away, Claire stood in the empty parking lot, hand still raised. The silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Somewhere on the road, Rowan was headed north, toward people who believed in miracles. And for the first time in months, his story didn't feel like it was ending. It felt like it was about to begin. They expected him to fight. He did nothing, not even a growl. The van rumbled to a stop at the end of a gravel drive bordered by towering evergreens dusted in early snow. A wooden sign read, "Thorn Wildlife Haven." It was quiet, save for the creak of tall branches swaying in the wind. Mark and Eileen Thorne stood side by side, watching as the rear doors of the van opened. Inside, the crate was still. Too still. "He's worse than I thought," Mark said softly, a furrow etched into his brow. 30 years as a large animal vet hadn't prepared him for this kind of stillness. Eileen nodded, wrapping her scarf tighter. "Let's not rush him." They wheeled the crate down a planked path leading to a private quarantine enclosure, a spacious roofed pen lined with straw bedding logs for climbing and shadowed corners. It had been home to everything from a broken-legged lynx to a blind fox, but never something this empty. Rowan didn't move when they opened the crate. He lay curled tight, muscles tense, eyes dull but open. No hissing, no growling, just quiet resignation. Mark and Eileen retreated. No forcing, no eye contact, just distance and presence. The first week passed like fog. Rowan didn't touch his food unless they left it and walked away. Even then, it was only the smallest scraps. Rabbit seemed slightly more accepted than chicken. Eileen made note. Mark adjusted the feeding plan. Twice a day they sat outside the enclosure. Eileen brought her knitting and hummed softly, old Irish lullabies passed down from her grandmother. Mark read aloud from veterinary journals or played soft guitar melodies. Nothing forced, just being there. The breakthrough came on day 18. Eileen was in her usual spot, bundled under a blanket, knitting a navy scarf for the coming deep winter. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. Rowan had inched forward just a few feet, still within the shadows, but watching her hands following each flick of the needle. She didn't react, just kept knitting, kept humming. That night, she told Mark. He moved. Voluntarily, Mark asked, hopeful but cautious. "Watched me for 5 full minutes. Then we keep doing exactly what we're doing." The next day, Mark brought out his old acoustic guitar. He sat cross-legged just outside the pen and began strumming low, gentle chords. Eileen watched as Rowan crept closer, still half hidden, but now only a few feet from the wire. By week 4, Rowan was eating daily. Not much, but enough. His eyes had shifted too, no longer vacant. There was something behind them now. Hesitation, curiosity. "He's gaining," Mark said one morning, gently holding up a used food bowl. "I'd say he's put on at least 3 pounds. "And he's grooming," Eileen added. "That coat's looking less like straw and more like fur." They introduced toys, a feather on a string, a hanging bundle of leaves, a scent log rubbed with deer musk. Rowan didn't pounce, but he sniffed, nudged, watched the feather twitch in the breeze with quiet intensity. One evening, as Eileen approached with his meal, something changed. Rowan didn't retreat. He didn't hide. Instead, he walked toward the fence, slow-measured, and made a sound. Not a meow, not a growl. A throaty, uncertain chirp that held the breath of something unspoken. Eileen froze. Rowan pressed his head gently against the mesh and blinked slowly. "Oh," she whispered, her voice catching. "You see me now." She didn't reach for him, just knelt beside the fence, tears welling in her eyes. Inside the house that night, she lit a fire and sat in silence with Mark. "I think," she said finally, "he's not just surviving anymore." Mark didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window at the pen where Rowan sat, watching the flames through the glass. He's starting to remember what it means to live. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. He chose her. The snow fell heavier that morning, blanketing the pine-covered hills in a silent white hush. Eileen stepped outside with Rowan's morning meal tucked under one arm, raw rabbit still slightly warm, placed on a ceramic dish. The sky was a pale silver, the air crisp. From inside the enclosure, amber eyes watched her. He was waiting. Not curled in the corner anymore, not hidden in shadows. Rowan now spent most mornings perched halfway up one of the wooden platforms Mark had built eyes level with the path. He liked the height, the quiet power it gave him. Eileen approached slowly, voice soft. "Good morning, sweetheart. Bit of snow out here today." He tracked her movement with calm focus. No fear, no flinch. She placed the dish near the edge of the fence and stepped back to her usual knitting spot just outside the enclosure. She had stopped bringing distractions lately. Now she just sat, present, listening to the sound of the wind rustling through trees, letting Rowan come to her in his own time. That morning, she heard something new. A soft crunch of straw, the faintest shift of weight. She turned slightly. Rowan had stepped down from the platform and was walking toward her. Head low, shoulders fluid, still cautious, but different now. Intentional. He stopped just short of the fence nose twitching. The scarf she'd been wearing, green wool speckled with pine needles, had slipped from her lap. He stared at it. Eileen stayed still. No sudden moves. Heart racing. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Rowan pressed his forehead against the wire. And stayed there. Eileen's breath hitched. Her hand, almost of its own accord, moved slowly toward the spot where his head rested. She let her fingers curl gently through the fence. Not touching him. Just there. Rowan closed his eyes. A sound rumbled from his chest, low, deep, unmistakable. He was purring. Inside the house, Mark was watching from the kitchen window. When he saw the stillness of the moment, the trust pulsing in silence, he stepped away. This was not his moment. It was hers. That night over dinner, Eileen barely spoke. She kept touching her fingertips like they still remembered the feel of warmth through the steel wire. "He chose me," she said finally. Mark looked up. "You think it was a mistake?" "No, that's the point. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't fear. He could have hidden. But he came to me." They sat quietly, letting the fire crackle. The next morning, Mark entered the enclosure during cleaning, the first time Rowan had been asked to shift into the holding area while a person worked inside his space. It was always a tense process. But Rowan moved without protest, his tail flicking once, before he settled behind the gate. As Mark worked, he noticed something tucked in the corner, the feather toy torn and chewed its string, unraveling. "He's playing," Mark said, aloud, astonished. "He's finally playing." By week 7, Rowan's transformation was undeniable. His coat had deepened into a warm, healthy amber muscles, firming beneath the fur. He used every inch of his enclosure, climbing logs, lounging on sun-warmed rocks, even stalking the wild hares beyond the fence tail, twitching with instinctual precision. But what truly marked the turning point was how he began to greet them. Each morning, when Eileen opened the back door, Rowan would chirp. Sometimes twice. Occasionally, with a short growling huff, a bobcat's hello. He rubbed the fence where she stood. He blinked slowly at Mark during feeding time. He even rolled once, exposing his belly, before darting away in mock offense when no one reacted. The wild was returning to him. And yet, there was something else, something deeper than survival. He wasn't just relearning how to be a bobcat. He was choosing his people. We said we'd never keep another. But he never asked to leave. Spring was slowly crawling across the British Columbia landscape. The snow had melted into thick moss and fresh soil. Wild crocuses poked up from the thawed ground. Birds returned. So did the questions. Mark was crouched beside the outdoor platform, adjusting the canopy over Rowan's sunning spot. Inside the house, Eileen was on the phone with Sophie Bell from Hollow Pines. "Yes," she said, voice low. "He's thriving. Hunting behaviors. Appetite coat. Everything looks good." There was a pause. Then came Sophie's voice. "It's time to talk about long-term placement." That evening, Mark and Eileen sat at the kitchen table, a silence between them deeper than usual. "They want to bring him to the main sanctuary," Eileen said, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Bigger space, other bobcats, educational setting." Mark didn't respond at first. Through the window, Rowan was visible stretched along the top perch of his enclosure, like a sun-dappled sculpture. But even from here they could see the flick of his ear every time the house door opened. The way he looked toward the window when their voices rose. The way he waited. "He's not just surviving," Eileen whispered. "He's invested in us. We can't keep him," Mark said, though his tone was uncertain. "We said after the cougar no more permanence. We're not a sanctuary. We're supposed to be temporary." "But what if he doesn't want to leave?" Mark looked at her. "You've seen it," she pressed. "He chirps when I walk by. He follows your voice. He plays with Teddy through the gate. He purrs when I hum." Mark nodded slowly. "And he doesn't do that with the Hollow Pines staff when they visit?" Eileen leaned in. "He trusts us. Not just people us. He chose us." Later that night, Mark stood by the fence alone. Rowan was awake, pacing slowly under the stars. When he spotted Mark, he paused and let out a short, rasping huff. "Yeah," Mark said, smiling faintly. "I hear you." The next morning they called Sophie. "We'd like to petition for permanent guardianship," Eileen said. "We know what that means. Permits, veterinary oversight, habitat modifications. We're ready." Sophie didn't hesitate. "He's not just another rescue. I knew it from the day you took him in. I'll back your application." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. They transformed the old sunroom into a Bobcat-safe indoor lounge, complete with ceiling perches, hiding cubbies, and scratch-proof furniture. A tunnel connected the space to Rowan's outdoor enclosure. Reinforced fencing was installed with double-entry airlocks and climb-proof mesh. Rowan supervised everything from the corner of his habitat, head-tilted ears flicking at the sound of drills. Teddy, the anxious border collie, barked nervously at the changes, but eventually began lying near the tunnel tail, thumping when Rowan approached from the other side. Baxter, their aging retriever, simply watched with sleepy approval, his loyalty extending to anyone Eileen loved. Then came the test. They left the tunnel door open, allowing Rowan to come into the sunroom for the first time without a barrier. He hesitated, took one step, then another. And then, without a glance back, he walked in, jumped onto the padded perch near the window, and curled up in the sunlight like he had always belonged there. "He's home," Eileen whispered, tears rising. Mark just nodded. "He's not going anywhere." That evening, with the house quiet and the fire crackling, Rowan wandered into the living room. He sniffed the armchair, eyed the blanket, then leapt up into Mark's recliner. He circled 3 times, curled into a ball, and let out one soft sigh. "I guess that's settled," Mark said. Outside, the spring wind stirred the pines. Inside, a wild thing rested his head on a human's lap and purred. He came from nothing, and gave us everything. By summer, Rowan was no longer a guest. He was a presence, a rhythm in the home. Mornings began with a chirp outside the bedroom door. If Mark or Eileen slept too long, they would hear soft paws pacing in the sunroom, or the gentle thud of Rowan leaping onto the window ledge, peering in with clear expectation. Breakfast routines evolved. Mark would pour coffee, while Eileen served Rowan his preferred dish rabbit, always fresh cut just the way he liked. He never begged, never demanded. But he waited. patient present, a quiet king in his chosen kingdom. Teddy, once so unsure, now played daily patrol with Rowan, racing on opposite sides of the fence line, barking and chirping a mismatched team of fur and energy. Baxter, the old golden, stayed close to Rowan during afternoon naps, the two curled in the same patch of filtered sunlight by the porch window. Rowan loved leaves, especially maple. Eileen often brought in freshly fallen leaves during her garden walks. Rowan would sort them with his paws, sniffing, pawing, choosing one like a sommelier with fine wine. Then he'd chew it delicately, as if it held a secret flavor only he understood. Teddy tried to imitate him once, bit into a leaf, gagged, spat it out, then barked indignantly at Rowan, who blinked slowly and kept chewing. It's like a nature documentary, and a sitcom had a baby. Mark joked, filming the scene for Sophie at Hollow Pines. But Rowan wasn't all calm and play. His instincts remained. A squirrel once wandered too close to the edge of the fence. In a flash, Rowan leapt 10 feet in a single bound, claws, outlanding just shy of the wire. The squirrel escaped. But the message was clear: the wild still lived in him. And yet, the tenderness never faded. One rainy afternoon, Eileen fell asleep on the couch with a book open on her chest. Rowan jumped up beside her, nestled against her ribs, and rested his chin across her hand. When Mark walked in and saw them, he didn't speak. He simply picked up his sketchpad and quietly began to draw. Autumn arrived, crisp and golden. Rowan grew his winter coat thick, lustrous with copper and gray streaks that shimmered in the sun. He spent more time inside, curling into corners, climbing atop the fridge, or perching beside the fireplace like a statue carved from forest spirit. Visitors came, old vet friends, former colleagues, even Dr. Claire Hensley, the woman who'd once marked him for euthanasia, flew in from Montana to see the miracle herself. She stood by the fence, stunned as Rowan approached, without hesitation, chirped and rubbed his head along the mesh near her hand. "I don't believe it," she whispered. "When he left our center, I thought we were just delaying the inevitable." Eileen smiled. He just needed the right people. Later that evening, as the house settled and the first frost dusted the window panes, Mark lowered into his recliner. Rowan appeared as expected, leapt up and curled across his lap with the grace of a creature who had chosen this life, not settled for it. But tonight, before curling up fully, Rowan did something different. He went to Eileen first, rubbed his face gently against her leg, then to Baxter, a soft nose touch, then to Teddy, who licked his ear in return. Only then did he return to Mark's lap and settle with a sigh so deep it seemed to echo. "He's saying, 'Thank you,'" Eileen said softly. Mark stroked behind Rowan's tufted ears. "No," he said after a pause. "He's saying, 'You're mine.'" Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees. Inside, a once-forgotten bobcat, 2 rescue dogs, and 2 people who never meant to adopt again, simply belonged. Together. Chosen. Home.